Hey everyone, we're diving into some seriously hopeful news today. You guys have sent in some articles about potential cures for sickle cell disease, and let me tell you, this gene editing stuff, it's big. But before we get lost in the sciencey weeds, how about we bring it back down to earth with a real person?
I think that's always important, right? To ground these breakthroughs in human experience.
Absolutely. So, meet Nathan Wood, 15 years old, huge basketball fan, lives just outside New York City. Sounds pretty normal, right?
Sure.
Except sickle cell has thrown some serious curveballs his way.
Yeah, it's a tough disease.
Imagine living with the constant threat of these excruciating pain crises, like debilitating pain, sometimes so bad he's hospitalized, and the things that can trigger these episodes.
Oh, I know, right?
Playing sports, a slight change in routine, even just the weather sometimes, it's like his body is on a hair trigger.
And unfortunately, that's not just Nathan's story. I mean, globally, we're talking about an estimated 20 million people living with sickle cell. It really highlights the global impact, you know?
It's a big number, for sure. And it's heartbreaking to think that while life expectancy for sickle cell in the U.S. has risen to an average of 53 years, in some countries, kids aren't even making it to age 5.
Yeah, there's a huge disparity.
Huge. But that's also why these new treatments, these potential cures, they could be such a turning point. We're not just talking about one gene therapy now, but two, both recently FDA approved.
That's a big deal. FDA approval means they've gone through rigorous testing.
Absolutely. It's not experimental anymore. This is the real deal.
Yeah.
And it could stop sickle cell in its tracks.
Amazing.
Right.
It's incredible to think about. I mean, sickle cell was actually the first molecular disease that scientists really understood. We've known about this root cause, this single mutated gene affecting hemoglobin, for decades. But progress has been slow, frustratingly slow.
It's like we've had the car manual this whole time, knew exactly which part was broken but couldn't fix it.
Exactly. But now with gene editing, we're talking about actually correcting that faulty gene.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't genetic engineers, break it down for us. What is gene editing, and how are we using it to tackle sickle cell?
All right, so imagine you have a blueprint, right? And there's a mistake in it, and that mistake leads to a faulty product. Gene editing is like going into that blueprint and correcting the error.
So in the case of sickle cell,
The faulty blueprint is that mutated hemoglobin gene, and the faulty product is the misshapen, sickle-shaped red blood cells that cause all the problems.
so with gene editing, instead of just treating the symptoms,
We're going straight to the source, fixing the problem at its root.
wow. So these therapies, they're basically giving the body a corrected blueprint.
Exactly. So it can start producing normal, healthy red blood cells. It's a total game changer.
It's not just adding years to someone's life, it's adding life to
Yeah.
their years.
Right.
No more constant fear of the next pain crisis, no more missing out on things because of their condition. But I'm guessing it's not as simple as just like flipping a switch, right? What's the catch with these gene therapies?
Well, you're right. It's not quite that simple. The treatment itself is intense. We're talking multiple procedures, potentially spending months in isolation as part of the recovery. It's a big commitment.
I don't know, there's...
Oh, and of course, like any new medical technology, access and cost are big considerations.
Right. That's always the challenge with cutting-edge treatments. They hold so much promise, but making sure that everyone who needs them can actually get them is a whole other hurdle.
It is.
But we'll dive into that more a little later. For now, I just want to focus on the incredible potential here. We're talking about potentially curing a disease that has impacted millions of lives for generations. It feels like we're on the verge of something truly revolutionary.
It really does. And what makes this even more exciting is that it's not just about sickle cell. I mean, this breakthrough has the potential to change how we approach other genetic diseases too. Think about it. If we can successfully treat sickle cell at its genetic root, imagine the possibilities for other conditions.
It's like opening a door to a whole new world of medical possibilities. This is where things start to feel like a sci-fi movie, you know? We've got this groundbreaking treatment, a young man on the cusp of a life-changing experience, and the potential to reshape the future of medicine as we know it.
That's pretty amazing.
It really is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's bring it back to Nathan. What does all of this mean for him? And what can we learn from his experience?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into what this journey might look like for Nathan, the hopes he and his family have for the future, and what his experience could mean for millions of others battling sickle cell around the world. You know, when we talk about Nathan starting this gene therapy soon, it's important to remember what a huge decision this is for him and his family.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just some theoretical science experiment, right?
Yeah.
This is a young man and his family taking a leap of faith with this powerful new technology.
Yeah, and remember, we talked about the treatment being pretty intense. Multiple procedures, a long recovery period, potentially months of isolation. It's a lot to take on, especially for a teenager.
It makes you wonder what that must be like for him, facing that kind of challenge head on.
Well, in one of the articles, his mother, Melissa, talks about how they haven't taken this decision lightly.
Yeah. She says she's basically been living in a constant state of worry ever since Nathan was diagnosed. Every little thing, him leaving the house a cough, even just a change in routine, it all carries this underlying fear of another potential crisis.
Wow, to carry that kind of burden, always wondering when the other shoe's going to drop, it really speaks to the emotional toll this disease takes on, not just on the person living with it, but on their entire family too.
Absolutely. And that's why this whole gene therapy breakthrough holds so much power. It's not just about treating a physical condition. It's about potentially transforming entire lives, lifting that constant weight of worry and fear.
Imagine that, though, to go from a life that revolves around managing this disease to one where those limitations could fade into the background. It's like a whole new world opens up.
What's that?
It really is. And for Nathan, those hopes for the future are pretty clear. He wants to be able to go to school without worrying about his health, hang out with his friends without restrictions, and of course dominate on that basketball court.
Right.
Typical teenager stuff, right? Except he's had to fight so hard for those experiences that most of us take for granted.
It's a good reminder that even with these mind-blowing scientific advancements at the heart of it all, are real people like Nathan hoping for a chance at a normal life.
Exactly. And his story highlights a bigger point, too, which is that this isn't just about the Nathans of the world who get access to these treatments. It's about the millions of others, especially in underserved communities, who are battling sickle cells with limited access to even basic health care.
It's that question of equity again, isn't it? How do we make sure that these groundbreaking therapies, these potentially life-altering treatments, reach everyone who needs them, regardless of where they live or their economic background?
It's a huge challenge, no doubt. We're talking about potentially revolutionizing how we treat genetic diseases, but that also means grappling with these complex ethical and logistical questions about access and affordability.
So it's like we're standing on the edge of this breakthrough, but navigating a minefield at the same time. So where do we even begin to unpack this issue of equitable access? What needs to happen to make sure these gene therapies don't just become another privilege for the wealthy?
That's what we'll dive into in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some of the potential solutions, the challenges involved, and why this isn't just a medical issue, but a societal one that requires a fundamental shift in how we think about healthcare.
So we've talked about this huge promise, right? Gene editing for sickle cell, but we've got to face it. There's that concern about making sure it's not just a treatment for the wealthy.
Yeah, it's complex. No easy answers.
Right.
But I think acknowledging it's not just scientific or medical, it's societal. That's got to be where we start.
What do you mean by that? Societal?
Well, think about it. This disease, sickle cell, it disproportionately affects marginalized communities, right? Communities that healthcare has historically underserved, underrepresented.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about this life-changing treatment potentially, but with $1 million price tag. That's a red flag, shouldn't be ignored.
It makes you wonder if we're just going to repeat the same cycle.
Heck yeah.
Inequity, even with these amazing advancements.
Exactly. We can't just be laser focused on the science and ignore the social side of this. How we allocate resources, who gets access, and how do we make sure cost isn't the deciding factor for someone's health? That's the big one.
So what can we do? Solutions. How do we make this system more equitable? Especially with something as complex and expensive as gene therapy.
It's going to take a multifaceted approach, that's for sure.
Go.
Research and development, that's one. We got to explore ways to make these therapies cheaper to produce and give to people.
So like finding different gene editing techniques.
Could be that streamlining how clinical trials work, or even just figuring out how to manufacture these therapies on a larger scale.
Right. So it's kind of like how tech starts out expensive, then gets cheaper as it's developed more.
Exactly. Analogy works, but tech advancements aren't enough on their own. We have to address the systemic stuff, too. The barriers to healthcare access.
So like what? What kind of barriers?
Well, you've got insurance coverage, of course, disparities in healthcare infrastructure, just basic stuff that's not equal. Investing in community-based programs, those are huge, especially in areas that are underserved.
So really it's like a whole healthcare system overhaul, not just a quick fix for one treatment.
You got it. And that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Gene editing, For sickle cell, this
Yeah.
is just one example. It's a much bigger issue we face. As a society, these technologies are going to keep advancing,
Mm.
and we have to be ready to talk about these things. Equity access. What kind of future are we building with these tools?
It's daunting, but also it's inspiring, right? Not just curing diseases, but a more just world in the process. That's kind of amazing.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm hoping people will take away from this whole deep dive. It's the human impact that matters. It's recognizing these breakthroughs are only meaningful if everyone benefits.
It's been a journey, for sure. From the nitty-gritty of gene editing to healthcare equity, all starting with one young man's story.
It has been.
Shows you the power of science, but also you can't forget social responsibility. That's a big one.
Couldn't agree more. We have a responsibility to use these amazing tools, not just for science, for the betterment of humanity. It's got to be both.
And on that note, we want you guys to keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and push for a future where everyone has that chance at a healthy life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring the world with open minds and compassionate hearts.